All right. What's up, YouTube? This is the first live stream in a while. I think the last one was the developer challenge, the 2024 Roblox developer challenge. So, yeah, I'm still alive. I'm back, and we are going to today be live making an Obby game live for you all. I'll just let this countdown go down a little bit before we start. And before we start, I want to also, for the viewers that not are only just here, but for the ones that will be watching this later, not live. Basically, the reason I'm doing this series live is because I want to show the development process from start to beginning with no edits. Sometimes it can be pretty hard for people trying to learn from tutorials when there's a lot of cuts, and sometimes it just jumps to, like, a tutorial will just jump from one thing to the next, and a person watching it doesn't exactly know how they got there. So let's get this started then. Let me pull up my screen real quick right here. All right, so we're going to start from the very beginning, which is the Roblox Studio creation experience page. So we're making Obby. We'll just start with a base plate. And, a base plate, we just start with nothing. And that's just fine. And let me explain what I would normally be thinking when creating a game for the first time, or from scratch, I guess. First of all, what am I trying to make? I'm trying to make an Obby. That's already been made millions of times. So I have a pretty clear idea of what it's going to be. A pretty classic Roblox Obby. So I don't need to be going into any design phase, really. It's more of what makes an Obby an Obby. Well, there's obstacles, and you have a player has a stage that they're currently at, and when they complete a stage, they, when they die and respawn, they get sent back to that spot. So that's the first thing we're going to work on. Is in this part 1, we are going to be making the player data. So making sure that each player, when they join in the game, they get a leaderboard with a stage value. And then we'll continue from there and use that stage value to spawn the player in the right place. And we don't need to really think too much farther than that, but that's what we're just going to start with. So let's go into server script service and create a script real quick, because this is going to be our main script that the game is, the main logic is run off of. We're going to call the script main. We're going to rename it to main. And now let's start with the logic here. So the first thing we're going to want to do is get the player service, because we need to know when a player joins the game. And the player service is just called players, but I'm just going to call it player service. And now we need to make a function run when a player joins into the game. And there's an event called player added for that. And when we call connect, we will connect this function here to the player added event. So we could also do it like this, where we say, we'll create a function on top and say on player added. And then the function will receive the player object. And then we can do player service dot player added. Player added is the event that fires when a player is added, and we'll just connect our function that is above it. So now this function will run when a player is added, and it will also be passed the player that joined. So the next thing we need to do is create the player data. So to do that, we're just going to go into replicated storage. Or no. Well, that would work. But let's go into server storage instead and create a module script. I love module scripts, and this is why I named my channel after them and my nickname. So we're going to call this player data, the module script. And whenever I name a module script, I also name the variable inside it the same. So I name the module script player data. So I'm going to rename the variable inside to player data. So what do we do with this? Well, the player data we're going to want to create for a player is, for right now, is only going to store the stage that they're currently at. Now, later down the line, we will also probably add, I don't know, stages they've been to, maybe even, you could experiment with it a little bit, but for right now, let's just do the stage that they're at. And we're going to create a function within this module script. And it's going to be called create data. And inside this function, we're going to create a table called data. And data.stage, we're going to give the table a property called stage. And for right now, we're going to give it the default value of 1, because that's the stage the player will start at when they first join into the game. So now that we have that, let's go into our main and let's require that. So, or other people might call it importing. Whoops, I did that wrong. We'll call it the name of the module script is player data. And to get that module script, or to pull the info from it, we call require. We do, then we give it the workspace address of it. So game.serverstorage.playerData. So now we have the player data required. So now that we have it required, we can use it and the functions that are within this module script, which we have create data. So we're going to want to create the data. New player data equals player data. And we'll just call the function create data. So now this is the table that has the stage value in it. Doesn't show that. That's something I do want for it to show. And we would do that by giving it a type. But I don't know if it's that important or not. Oh, here's a problem. I didn't return it. So in the create data, I created the table and gave the property, but I never passed the data table back from the function. So it was being created and it wasn't being used. It wasn't being given back. So now it should be given back. Let's see if it shows. Yeah, okay, so it has the stage property now. Correct. So on the player added, we create the player data. What we're going to want to do now is also create the leaderboard so that we can see what that stage value is. The player wouldn't only be able to see their own, but they should be able to see the other players so that they're motivated to get to the stage that other people are at. So to create a leaderboard or a leader stats in Roblox, it's quite simple, but unless you, I say it's simple, but it's basically just a folder. So inside main, I'm also going to insert an object, which is a folder. And I'm going to rename it to leader stats with no capitals. So this is important. You have to name the leader stats with no capitals, and it has to be leader stats, one word. And that'll be important. And inside, we're going to insert another object, which will be an int value. That's not an int value. An int value. And we're going to rename it to stage. That's also important if you want the leader stats to show the name stage on it. And the value, the default value, will be 1. So I'm just going to set the value to 1 in that stage variable. The next thing we want to do is get that leader stats folder into the player object. Luckily, we have the player object right here on the player added function within our main script, but we don't have a leader stats made for that, like the leader stats folder made for that player specifically. We just have one that's parented to the main script. So at the top, I'm going to index or create a variable that's values equal to that leader stats folder that we just created. And that's going to be equal to script wait for child leader stats. Or actually, rather than put it in the script, what I will do is put it in server storage as well with the player data module script. So this way, the server storage, the things inside server storage, load before server script service runs. This way, when server script service runs our main script, leader stats folder will already be created and we won't have to wait for it to be created. That can keep some potential bugs from happening. So let's get the leader stats here again, but this time instead of doing script.parent or script.leaderstats, it will be game.serverStorage.leaderstats. And now we're wanting to put a leader stats folder into the player. Now we only created one leader stat, so we're going to have to, in order to give each player a unique folder, the same folder that we already created in the server storage, we're going to want to clone that leader stats folder so everyone gets their own folder. That's an important part. So we're going to take a cloned our player leader stats. How about? And it's equal to leader stats clone. So we're cloning it. We're making a duplicate so we can give everyone their own unique folder. And we're going to now put it into the player, or making it the player its parent by taking the player leader stats, indexing the parent, and setting it equal to our player. So we should be able to see the effects of that if we were to just press the play button already. So let's press the play. And at the top, we can see the stage value is there. Now, it is not technically equal to the stage value we created with the player stats, or not with the module script player data. It's not the same value. They're not linked. So if the player data within the module script were to change, it wouldn't change the leader stats for the player in the game. So we're just going to have to link that. And really what we're going to do is, rather than like update it every second or something like that, we're going to work with the leader stats themselves when indexing what stage a player is at. And then when the leader stat value changes, it will automatically update the value here. Now, how do we do that? It's a great question. We're going to have to go into our main script, and underneath where we parented the leader stats to the player, we should also connect new functions that will listen to when the stage values change. And to do that, we're just going to call player leader stats dot stage dot changed. We're going to connect a function to it. So anything we put inside this function will run when the stage value is changed. All we're going to do now is do player leader or new player data dot stage equals. This should be the new value is passed to this function. So we just take this, and now our value here is going to be equal to the new value of the stage int value object. The reason we're doing this is just in case if we were just to only use the stage value that's inside the player, well, when the player leaves, it might leave before the server saves the player's data. It's just kind of just a protection in case Roblox changes something. But anyway, let's continue on. So now when the player stage changes, it will change the actual module script data. This creates a connection, and we do need to disconnect it when the player leaves, which can be troublesome. However, we're just going to do a really simple implementation. And at the top, we're going to call create a table called connections. And underneath our creation of said connection, we're going to do connections player.userid is equal to our new connection. So we're storing this connection object that's returned into this table that's full of connections. And the key to it is the player's user ID, so we can index it later when they leave. And we're going to create a new function real quick. On player left, you can name this whatever you want, but I'm just going to call it on player left. And we're going to connect a new event to it, which is player service.player removing, which is when they leave the game. We're going to connect on player left. So now we have a new function that runs when the player leaves the game. And what we're going to want to do now is disconnect this connection. And to do that, all we have to do is get the connection first. It's equal to connections, player user ID. And then our connection, we're just going to want to call disconnect. And we're also going to want to remove the index or the value from the table. So all we have to do is do player user ID and set it to nil. So now that connection is gone. It's been disconnected and removed from the table of connections. And that just keeps us from having a memory leak. These connections can cause memory leaks whenever you connect a function to something. These will be fine usually. However, when you connect, especially when you connect, if you connect a function within another connected function, which is what we're doing here, we need to disconnect them. Otherwise, the server can crash from memory overload. But that's a simple implementation of it. So now we can kind of ignore the player data table for now on, because we'll just be working with the stage value within, or the int value within the leader stats folder. And when we change the value there, it will also automatically change the value within the table. And that the table, the reason we have the table is so we save that data later when the player leaves. But for this part of the tutorial, I will not be going over saving and loading data, because that's something you should do later when you have the game functioning and you have the game, you have like an idea of how the data, what you're working with will be in a format. It's much easier to implement that early on in an Obby game, because you're probably only working with a stage value, maybe a little bit more than that. But more advanced games, you might not know what you need to save right away, so you might need to implement your save differently depending on what decisions you make in the future for your game, when first developing it. So I always recommend to wait on the saving of data and doing that later at a later implementation. So now that we have the server, what's up in the chat or in the stream? I see someone's there. Hello. We have a stage, and now we can use it to, well, actually spawn the player. But to know where we need to spawn the player, we actually need to make, the obby itself. So let's do that. We're going to delete this base plate because we're going to want the player to fall when they die. We're also going to want to delete this this spawn point, because we're not going to be using it to actually spawn the player. We could keep it, actually. It'll just get overridden later, but that can just be the initial spawn point. However, I'm just going to use it for right now as a basis of where the first level starts. So the next thing we need to think about when making the obby stages is we need to make a consistent layout for each stage, meaning they have to share something so that we don't have to write unique code for each stage. In that case, I mean each stage should have a start point and the end point, which technically is the start point for the next stage. So really each stage just has a start point, and that's something we need to make consistent. Now, that's probably the only thing we need to make consistent stage to stage is the spawn point. So I want to make sure that I have a pretty standard sizing of these parts, which is 4, and the position of the part is consistent, no decimals in there or anything, because it's easier to work with when the position of an object is, that's fine. I'm going to change my move value to 1, so when I edit the size of something, it only edits by 1 stud. And for right now, we're just going to make a really, really basic stage, because we just want to test, we're going to want to test the moving or the spawning of the player at the stage. So let's just use the spawn point for right now as a specifier of where the next stage starts. And let's say this one has jumps. So this isn't going to be what it is in the end, but we're just making an example stage for the game. And let's put one more spawn point at the end there. Specify the end of the stage. Okay, so now we technically have 2 stages. Now, what I'd recommend is putting each stage into its own folder so you can edit each stage individually and even move a whole stage really easily. I would have done that first, but I didn't think about it. So I'm going to create a folder. It's going to be called stages. And within that stages folder, I'm going to create a stage 1 folder within it. I'm going to put all of the parts of stage 1 into that stage 1 folder. And I'm going to do the same thing for stage 2. But first I need to make the folder again. And now we have a stage 2 folder. So let's move all the objects for stage 2 into the stage 2 folder. I'm going to delete this part for right now because that would be technically the start of stage 3, and all we need to do is work with stage 1 and 2 for right now. Now I'm going to bring up the model tab real quick because we're going to need to make sure that all these parts are anchored, which they weren't, so they were going to fall when the game started. What's up, Alec Boy TV? Hello, welcome to the channel. Or welcome to the live stream. Let's see. So right now, if we were to play the game, we have the stage value, but we do start in the right place, but I wonder if that would continue if we died and respawned again. Because there's, yeah, see, these are both neutral spawn points, so it's kind of random at which one you're sent to. It's not using the stage value yet. And really, we don't want these to actually be spawn points. Because we can keep this one a spawn point, but let's change this part to being just a normal part, because we don't want to spawn anywhere else but the start, which is over here. Now for the spawn points for each stage, we're going to want to tag them as such. So in the properties, oh yeah, blocks for lives. I will probably be, yeah, I will be I am working on a new AI video. Yeah, let's see, maybe just showcasing it rather than showing how it was done. Yeah, I should showcase what I've done because I have worked on the AI some more recently. So I've made it play tic-tac-toe now, and it can win. It doesn't lose anymore, which is kind of cool. But yeah, that's a great recommendation in the chat. I don't know why this error is popping up when we leave. Oh, I see. So I made a mistake in the main script. So this is the problem when you name things similar to each other. Rather than editing the connections table, I was trying to edit the property of connection itself, which is not what I wanted. I just needed to change this to connections, and that should fix that error that pops up. Thanks, Block for Life. Thanks for joining the chat. So I'm going to continue on with this. So this will be called, we shouldn't worry about what they're named, but if they're a special part, we're going to want to add a tag to them. So in this case, we're going to call this a start point, or just, how about stage start? And we're going to just call it a stage start, and each stage will have its own stage start. We're probably going to want to rename them so we can see in the Explorer which one they are. For some reason, I can't rename this one. I've never had this happen before. Why can't I rename this part? Okay. We're going to want to name it maybe start. I don't know. Just something unique so you can tell which one's the start place. And they can all be called starts within their individual stage folders. That is just quite fine, since they're within their stage folders, we know which one we're actually indexing. We also will want to color them differently so that the player has like a visual cue of where the stage starts and ends. And then finally, we're actually going to want to spawn the player to where their stage is. Because if we were to change the stage value of our leader stats to 2, it would still spawn us over here at stage 1. And if we died, like what we want to do is when we hit this block here, we're going to want that stage value to go up to 2. One other thing before we do that is I want to create a sensor for that part so that when a player runs into it, their stage changes to the next number. To do that, within each start block, we're going to want to create a new block that kind of looks like this. We're going to make it non-collidable or can collide to false, so we go through it if we were to touch it. We're also going to want to make it transparent, so the player won't even know it's there. We're going to call it sensor, if I can rename it. Sensor. And we're going to put it inside each start block. However, it's going to need to be on top of each start block. So I'm going to duplicate this sensor block and then put it into the other start block. However, I'm going to have to move it to that start position. This one doesn't matter really because we don't need a sensor for stage 1. We're already there. But let's just put it there so we don't have to work with any unique logic for stage 1. So now all of our stages for right now have a start block that should also have which stage they are. All we got to do really is just put an attribute within the folder here. So like stage 1, for instance, we're going to give it an attribute called stage. That's going to be a number. And it's just going to have the stage 1 value within it. And stage 2 will have stage 2 value in it. Whoops. Stage number. And this one will be 2. And we're going to use those to set the value for the player. Let's make it so that when we hit the sensor for stage 2, we actually get our stage updated to being the number 2. To do that, in our main script, we're going to create a new function called setup. This one won't be connected to anything. It's just going to run when the game starts. So we're going to call it right underneath it. Whoops. Like that. But I like making a function for it just so it's in its own container. And what we're going to want to do is start creating connections to those sensors. So when a player hits a sensor, their stage gets updated. We don't want to have to connect each stage itself, like make a new line for each stage, because when we create more stages, we'd have to create more lines of code. What we want is a way to do it so that when we increase the amount of stages we have, our code will still be able to connect those events to even our new ones that we add. And that's why we laid out each stage the same way. we need to get a new service. At the very top, I'm going to create a new variable for tag service. I think it's called tag service. No, it's called collection service. I bet. The collection service. And using collection service will get our tagged objects. So start points. In the setup function, we're going to retrieve our start points that we created through collection service through the function called getTagged. And the tag we have was called, it was, this one doesn't have it, does it? Probably was just on stage 1. The tag was stage start. So I'm going to want to give that same tag to the other one, like that. And we're going to want to use the same name here. So stage start. So now we're getting all of the parts with the tag called stage start. We're going to want to loop through them. And so this is a simple loop that just goes through the list. And this start variable here is the part, which is as so, a part. And what we're going to want to do is get both which stage this part is a part of and get the sensor from that start part. And each start part has a sensor object or sensor part parented or as child within that part. So let's get it first. So sensor equals start dot sensor. And we're also going to want to get this stage that it's within, which would be start, local stage is equal to start dot parent. And each start part is a child of the stage folder that has the attribute stage. So we're going to want to get an attribute called stage, and that's the value it should be. Now what we're going to want to do, let's let Roblox know that the sensor is a part as well. We're going to want to connect the sensor to changing the stage. So let's first see if the player hits it. Sensor dot touched connect. We're going to connect a function to it. We do not have to worry about disconnecting the connection because this connection will be up for the whole time the server is up. We don't have to worry about it turning off. And now let's just print sensor touched, and we'll also print the stage that it was a part of. Let's test it out and make sure it's working. So the sensor is working for the stage 1 sensor. Now let's look at stage 2 sensor. Yeah, if you look at the output at the bottom, it says sensor 1 touched and sensor 2 touched. So the sensor touches are working. All we have to do now is update the player stage. Now, in this code block here, we don't have access to the player data yet. So how do we get it? Well, we just have to look up the player that touched it and get the stage leader stat that's inside the player object. To get the player object, we need to find out which character touched the sensor. So the sensor event passes what it touched, and I'm just going to call it hit. So hit is whatever touched the sensor. And in this case, it will be a part of the Roblox character, which could be an arm, could be a leg. We don't know which one it will be. So to check to see if it was actually a character that hit it or touched it, we're going to create a variable called character and do hit.parent. And hit.parent should be the character model, but if it's not, it's okay. We'll be checking to make sure that this is actually a character model. What we got to do now is do local player, create a player variable, and it's going to be called, or it's going to be set to player service, get player, from character, and pass in that character variable. So if it wasn't actually a character that hit the sensor, this function here will just return nil. If it was the character, it will return the player variable associated with it, which is awesome. We just needed the player variable. And if it's not an actual player that hit it, we can just ignore the sensor touch. And to check to see if the player was actually found, all we have to do is make an if statement that says if player then, because if it was nil, this if statement won't pass, or it won't run it. So now we know the player exists. We know what stage that was hit. All we got to do now is get that stage object from the leader stats. So let's get the leader stats first. And the leader stats should be called leader stats. Find first child, leader stats. So if it doesn't find it, it will return nil. Let's do stage value. And that's going to be equal to leader stats and leader stats find first child stage. So you might be confused with this line and what it's doing because of that and right here. Basically, all it does is it finds the leader stats, and this could either be the variable will either be nil or the leader stats that it found. So this and makes sure that it did find it, and then if it did find it, it will return this value. And I'm going to add an or to it. If it didn't find the leader stats, it will ignore this line and skip to this one and just set it to nil. So this is what we call a ternary operator. Ternary. I can't remember if I pronounced that correct or not. But anyway, that makes it a little bit more simplified. We don't have to make a new if statement for each thing. And then finally, if stage value, we do need to make a new if statement for this one. If stage value. So if we found it, which is an int value, we will want to make sure that the stage you hit was the next stage you were supposed to touch. So here's a thing with old Roblox that with bad developers really hurt my heart back in the day when I was a kid playing Obbies, was if you fell off an obstacle and then you landed onto a stage previous, sometimes the stages were stacked in the air so that if you fell off a high level stage, you could land onto a low level stage that you already completed a long time ago. If you hit the checkpoint again, you shouldn't go back to it shouldn't regress your stage value. You should only be able to go up in stage value, and you should only go up in increments of 1 because you shouldn't be able to skip a stage unless you're a hacker. So we need to make a check for that so that a hacker can't just fly to the end, hit the end point, and it says, hey, you won. No, you got to complete each stage, and that won't stop the hacker entirely, but it will at least make it more annoying for them, and in a normal player, they won't even be affected. So it's a pretty easy check. All we got to do is make sure that the sensor stage is one value higher than the player's current stage value. So if stage value and stage value is equal to, or no, yeah, if the stage value of the player is equal to stage, well, I was going to do -1, but let's do +1 over here instead. If the stage value of the player +1 is equal to the stage of the sensor, now we can increase that value. Stage value dot value plus equal 1, which just increments it by 1. So now when we play the game, let's see if that increments our stage value at the top right here. So this is stage 1. Right now, there are some errors, so we're going to have to see what's wrong here. But let's see what happens when we hit the sensor for stage 2. No, there are errors. And that's part of the development process. There's always going to be errors. I've been doing this for many years now, and I still have errors. So we are adding, see, here's the problem, is in this if statement, I was doing if stage value and stage value +1. Well, stage value is an object. It's not a number. You can't add 1 to an object. But the object has a value property that is a number, and that's what I was actually trying to index here. So just add that dot value in, and it should fix it up. And that also explains why it wasn't working with the other sensor as well. So now let's hit this sensor. And now my stage is set to 2. There we go. However, if I were to reset and respawn, I'm still going to be sent to stage 1, which is an issue. But now that we have the stage value updating to the stage that you got to, now we have the data we need to know where to spawn the player when they spawn. And we're going to go back to our main script again. What we're wanting to do is spawn the player in accordance to their stage value. So in the onPlayerAdded, we're going to want to make code run when the player spawns, not just joins the game. This is when they join the game. We want code to run when the player actually spawns. To do that, all we got to do is the player object has an event called player character added. And we're going to connect to that event so that this code runs when that event fires. This event fires when the character is spawned or just added to the workspace. It also passes the model. And that's what we're going to be manipulating when they spawn. So here's where many people go wrong with the spawning of characters when they first load into the game. Many people will just set the position of the player right here in one line and call it good. And I'll do that first. So first we have the character. We also have the player. So we also have the player leader stats right here above it, which is perfect. We're going to want to disconnect this as well. So let's create a new variable called character connection. And below it, we're just going to add it to the connections table. But rather than just use their ID, we're also going to set it to include character so that we get a unique ID for each connection still. So this just combines the player user ID and the string character together to make the key. And before I forget, let's do the same thing for that connection here, where we disconnect it. I think this should be the last connection we have to worry about like this. So we won't have to create one for each connection every time. But with bigger games, you'd have a connection manager where you can store connections, disconnect them automatically. You wouldn't have to write code for each one. But when we're only working with 2 connections, I think it should be fine. And let's update the key for the disconnecting of this event as well. And that should, right here is the last thing we need to update. That should disconnecting the character connection now. So no memory leaks for this one. Now, what do we want to do with the character? We want to take the player leader stats value, or the stage value here. So local stage target equals new player data stage. And let's just do actually player leader stats stage value. Let's just index the leader stats value rather than the table value that we're going to use to save later. So now we have the stage target. That's the stage we want to spawn the player at. And we have a folder of stages. And they're just named stage and then the number after it of what stage they are. So to find the stage that we need, or the position we need, we're going to want to spawn them at the start part of that stage. So let's find the stage folder that we need. That's going to be equal to stage folder is equal to workspace dot stages, and we're going to call it stage. And then we don't know which stage. We can't like manually input the value here. We have to use the variable we found up here. This is the stage we want to target. So we're going to have to concatenate that value. So this string will become stage and then whatever number this variable is. And then it will find that stage folder. Okay. Now, what do we do with the stage folder? Well, we need to get the start part, because that's where the player needs to spawn in that stage. So local start equals stage folder. And let's let Roblox know this is supposed to be a folder here. Stage folder. And we're going to find first child. And it's going to be called start. And this is a part. And now that we've found the start part, all we got to do is now set the position of the character to that part. With a little bit, we want to raise the player up a little bit so they don't spawn inside the part. We want it to spawn on top of it. So character, pivot to, so we're going to use a function called pivot to, and that's what we're going to use to move the character. It transforms the position of the model, and the character is a model. So, and we need a C-frame. Well, we're just going to create a new C-frame, and we're going to use the look-at function. And now let's do start, which is our part that we're spawning the player to. And we're going to take the C-frame, or the position. I actually don't like putting a function call within a function call. So let's take that out and create a new variable on top and call it spawn C-frame. And it's going to be equal to the C-frame.lookat I was just doing before. And let's set the lookat to vector 3. For right now, let's just do 1, 0, 0. and keep the third vector as default. So now we have our spawn C-frame, and we're just going to want to pivot to that. I believe that should sometimes work. And here's the problem. This isn't quite how you should do it, in the sense that sometimes the character hasn't loaded before this runs fully. So it will change the character's position, but then the server will set it back to what it was before when it fully loads. It kind of overrides it, so you got to wait for the character to fully load before moving it. Sometimes, and that's the problem, is that sometimes this will work and sometimes it won't. And player or developers for the longest time have scratched their head on this issue when making obbies, and they have a hard time figuring out what's wrong. Oh, I also forgot. Did I do the same thing again? I did. So again, I need to rename this to connections. This is supposed to be connections here within our, when we disconnect it. I really need to name that better, but it's kind of too late now. So let's try that again. What I forgot to do was raise the position of the player. So we're spawning inside of the start block right now, which is right here. So the middle of our body is inside this part. We want it to spawn a little bit above that part. That's really easy to fix, because all we got to do is take start position and or spawn C-frame and just add a vector to it, which will be 0, 4, 0. So we're making the player spawn 4 studs above this C-frame right here, which is our spawn C-frame in the end. So let's try that this time. This time, we are not dead, so that means it probably worked. But let's see what happens when we increase our stage to 2, and then we die, and see if we spawn at stage 2 or not. We spawned at stage 2. The only issue is that we spawned looking the wrong direction. And that can be annoying to players when they are playing an obby, because when they die and they spawn like this, sometimes they'll start going backwards in the obby because they forgot which stage they just played before. And then when they can sometimes complete the obby backwards, and then when they get here and they're like, okay, why is my stage not increasing to 3 now? And then they realize, oh, wait, I went the wrong way. That can make a person very mad, and that's not good. We shouldn't. As a developer, our whole job is to make the players have an enjoyable experience. So let's go fix that real quick so that the player actually spawns in the direction of where they're supposed to go. And to do that, we're just going to take the start part and we're going to rotate it so that the front of that part is always going to be facing the direction that the player should go. So we're going to want to take the front side of it. Now, how do you figure out which side is the front? Because Roblox does have a side that's specified as the front. Well, my little trick is just to take the part and insert a decal into it. Because when you insert a decal, you can see this orange line that appears on one of the edges. And then if you look at the decal object and you look at which side or face it's called, which face it's on, it defaults to the front face. And this orange line specifies which side that is. So you can use a decal to figure out which face of the block is technically the front, which luckily for us is the right direction. We want it to be facing the way the player needs to go, which it is right now. Now, if I were to like change the face of the decal to the back, you would be able to see that this face here is the back of the part. But, or no, this is the right. I changed it to right for some reason. The back would be this one here. But anyway, Since the front is facing the right direction, we don't have to change anything, but otherwise I would have rotated the part some if I needed to, like so that the front edge is facing where the player needs to go. So now that we know that it is facing the right direction, instead of just what we need is the look of the part. So start look, we'll call it, is equal to start, the start part, its C frame, which is the orientation and position of the part. And then we're just going to take a property called the look vector, which is the direction that the part is facing on its front, looking from its front face, I guess, the direction of the front face pointing towards. We're going to use that instead of taking this. Before we created a new vector for the look of the player, but now we're just going to use the look of the start part. So now when we die or spawn, we should be facing the right direction every time. And that didn't work, did it? It didn't work. And you know what it might be? It might be that issue I was talking about before, where sometimes the player isn't quite loaded. Yeah, let's fix this. Oh, wait. I know what the issue is. It's because the start look needs the start position as well. So that's kind of annoying, but all we got to do is do start position, and we add it to the look, or we add look to it, and that should fix the position that we're looking towards. So let's press the play button now and go to stage 2. I'll reset this time, and look at that, we're facing the right direction, and if we were to die again, we should still be facing the right direction. Yep. So this will be the end of this video for right now. I'm just going to try to make this 1 hour live streams for this series. It's also kind of a wake-up call to my community to let them know I'm alive again. So before I leave, let me explain what's next on the agenda for the next part. So for the next part, we're going to create some parts like kill blocks and other obby obstacles, common obstacles. And now that we have the spawning mechanics correct, we can make more stages, which will be much more fun than what we have right now. I also forgot, before I end the tutorial part of this video, let's add run service to the top of this script. Because run service has a very important event called the heartbeat, and that heartbeat event fires when the physics engine or the physics renderer steps a frame. And on this character connection here that runs when the character is added, we set the position of the player right away. We're going to want to make sure that the physics has stepped or done a physics frame before changing the character's position. All we got to do is do run service, heartbeat, wait. All this does is say, hey, wait for the next physics frame before continuing the code. And this just ensures that our player is loaded fully before setting a new position for it. As you saw before, it was working. So why would we need to change anything? Well, when you get into a real server, sometimes lag can happen more often. And then players, when they're at stage 2 and they die and they reload, sometimes they might be spawned back at the first stage, or the initial default position. And players might not like that. So that check just makes sure that it will be correct. And anyway, that's it for this video, or this live stream video. Some things to note before you go is that I have a guilded server now. That's going to have of all of my future live streams will be set in advance, and it'll be in the calendar of the guilded server. The guilded server will also have more than just the live streams. It will have new videos, and you can even suggest video ideas to me in there. So Guilded is like Discord, but better. I found it's much easier to manage. So if you're used to Discord, it's just like that. If you want to join, I just created the server today. So please join if that interests you. As well as I just released a new game called Good Night, Sleep Fright. It's on my profile page, Super Speedy 101. MrModuleScript is my nickname. You'll also be able to find the trailer to that game on my channel here. So if that also interests you at all, it's a really short game if you want to play. It's like 4 minutes long. It's a survival horror game. Just a shameless plug in there before I close this live stream. And to all of the viewers in the future, if there are any, I hope you find these tutorials for the series helpful. And if you do, please leave a comment. That will improve the chances that the next part is released. Thanks for everyone who did join in to the live stream today. I know it was kind of out of the blue because the last live stream I did was like a half a year ago. But I'll be continuing to do this more often and at better times for people to watch. So, yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys for the next video, and stay tuned for not just live streams, but also just more video publishes from now on. See ya.